The story begins quietly, far from laboratories or lecture halls, in the open waters of the eastern Mediterranean. In the spring of 1901, a group of sponge divers from the small Greek island of Symi were making their seasonal journey along familiar routes. These men were experienced free divers, accustomed to descending into deep water with little more than weighted lines and heavy canvas suits. On this trip, rough weather forced them to change course and seek shelter near the rocky island of Antikythera, a narrow stretch of land sitting between Crete and mainland Greece. While waiting for the seas to calm, one of the divers decided to make a test descent. What he found below was not sponge beds, but something far more unexpected. Scattered across the seabed were human figures, frozen in bronze and marble. At first glance, the diver reportedly believed he was seeing drowned bodies. But as he surfaced and others followed, it became clear that these were statues, lying among broken wood, pottery, and metal fragments. They had stumbled upon an ancient shipwreck. News of the discovery quickly reached Greek authorities. Within months, one of the earliest organized underwater archaeology efforts began, led by the Hellenic Navy. Over the course of 1901 and 1902, divers worked in difficult and dangerous conditions, bringing artifacts to the surface piece by piece. The wreck lay at a depth of around 45 meters, deep enough to make every dive risky by the standards of the time. Several divers suffered serious injuries, and one would later die from complications related to decompression sickness. What they recovered, however, was extraordinary. There were bronze statues of athletes and philosophers, marble sculptures, finely crafted glassware, coins, jewelry, and ceramics. The cargo pointed clearly to a Roman-era ship, dating to around the 1st century BCE, transporting Greek art and luxury goods. Many scholars believe the ship was carrying treasures looted from Greek cities, possibly on their way to Rome, where demand for Greek art was high. Among these dramatic finds was a small, corroded object that attracted little attention. It was retrieved along with other debris and broken artifacts, appearing at first like a shapeless lump of bronze and decayed wood. It was cataloged without much thought and sent to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, along with the rest of the material. Compared to statues and sculpture, it seemed insignificant. For months, the object sat quietly in storage. It might have remained there indefinitely if not for a moment of chance. While being cleaned and conserved, the lump cracked open. Inside, museum staff noticed something unexpected. Embedded in the corrosion were traces of gear teeth. Not decoration, not random damage. Carefully shaped, evenly spaced teeth, like those found in mechanical devices. This small observation changed everything. At the beginning of the 20th century, the idea that ancient civilizations built complex gear-driven machines was not part of mainstream historical thinking. Scholars knew the Greeks were skilled mathematicians and astronomers. They understood geometry, planetary motion, and mechanical principles in theory. But physical devices with precision-cut gears were believed to be a much later development, associated with medieval clocks and early modern engineering. Early researchers examining the object were unsure what to make of it. Some thought it might be a simple astrolabe, an instrument used for measuring the position of stars. Others assumed it was part of a navigational tool. But as more fragments were examined, these explanations became harder to support. The gears were too numerous. Their arrangement was too complex. The artifact was broken into several pieces, now known as fragments, each heavily corroded by centuries underwater. Bronze had reacted with seawater, forming thick layers of mineral buildup. Wood from the original casing had mostly decayed, leaving only faint traces. Without modern imaging, scholars were limited to what they could see on the surface. Even so, it was clear this was not an ordinary object. The gears were cut with consistent spacing and carefully calculated sizes. This suggested deliberate design, not trial and error. Whoever made it understood how gear ratios worked and how rotational motion could be controlled and transferred. At the time, there was no known parallel. No similar devices had been found in other ancient sites. No clear descriptions existed in surviving texts. The object seemed to stand alone, disconnected from everything historians thought they knew about ancient technology. Importantly, the mystery did not begin with dramatic claims or talk of lost civilizations. It began with discomfort, a quiet mismatch between expectation and evidence. The shipwreck itself fit neatly into established history. Roman ships carrying Greek art were well documented. Underwater archaeology had revealed many such cargoes over time, but this object did not fit the pattern. As word spread among scholars, debate followed. Some questioned whether the object truly belonged to the shipwreck. Could it have fallen into the site at a later date? This idea was eventually dismissed, as corrosion patterns and associated materials clearly placed it within the same time period as the rest of the cargo. Others suggested it was a one-off experiment, perhaps created by an unusually skilled craftsman. That possibility raised further questions. Why had no other examples survived? Why was there no mention of such devices in historical records detailed enough to describe water clocks, siege engines, and complex automata? By the early decades of the 20th century, the artifact had a name, the Antikythera mechanism, named after the island near where it was found. But a name did not bring understanding. For years, it remained a puzzle stored behind museum glass, discussed occasionally but rarely fully examined. What made this discovery so powerful was its setting. This was not an object pulled from a royal tomb or a famous city. It came from the seafloor, preserved by accident, part of a deep-sea mystery revealed only because of a storm and a diver's curiosity. Like many ancient ocean discoveries, it survived not because it was valued, but because it was lost. By the end of this chapter in the story, one fact stood firm. More than 2,000 years ago, a ship sank in the Mediterranean, carrying art, wealth, and something else entirely. A compact mechanical device built with precision and intent. It did not rewrite history overnight, but it quietly challenged the idea that ancient technology followed a simple linear path. The mystery was not about impossibility, it was about expectation. A sunken structure of gears and dials, resting among statues and amphorae, waited patiently for the right tools and the right questions, and once noticed, it refused to be ignored.
When the fragments from the Antikythera shipwreck were first laid out on tables in Athens, no one imagined they were looking at one of the most unusual mechanical objects ever recovered from the ancient world. At a glance, the pieces appeared unremarkable. Corroded bronze plates, greenish lumps hardened by centuries underwater, bits of decayed wood barely holding together. Nothing about them suggested precision or purpose, and yet slowly, detail by detail, the object began to resist simple explanation. Reconstructed in its most basic form, the Antikythera mechanism was once a box roughly the size of a shoebox. It had wooden outer panels and metal fittings. Inside this wooden casing sat a dense arrangement of bronze gears carefully mounted on shafts and plates. Modern analysis has identified more than 30 gears, though the original number may have been higher. These were not decorative pieces. They were cut to mesh together, turning smoothly when rotated. That fact alone was unsettling for early researchers. Bronze gears with evenly spaced teeth require careful planning and skilled metalworking. Each tooth must be shaped with consistency. The spacing between them must be exact, or the system will jam. This kind of precision is expected in later clockwork, not in artifacts dated to around 100 BCE. Early examinations showed that the gears were not random sizes. Their ratios were intentional. Some gears turned others faster, some slowed motion down. This meant the maker understood how to control movement mathematically. The device was designed to convert one rotation into many different predictable movements inside the box. At the time, this raised immediate doubts. Historians knew that ancient Greeks understood mathematics deeply. They wrote about geometry, proportions, and celestial motion. But understanding theory is not the same as building machines. No other known ancient artifact showed this level of mechanical integration. There were simple machines, yes, water clocks, pulleys, screw pumps, but nothing resembling a compact gear-driven system. Because of this gap, skepticism was natural. Some scholars suggested the object did not belong to the wreck at all. Perhaps it had fallen into the site centuries later. This idea faded as more evidence was studied. coins, pottery, and wood fragments from the same layer, all dated to the same period. The corrosion patterns on the mechanism matched long-term submersion. It was ancient beyond reasonable doubt. Others proposed simpler explanations. Maybe it was a navigational tool like an astrolabe. Ancient astrolabes did exist, and some used rotating parts, but astrolabes were usually flat and open, not enclosed in boxes filled with gears. And they did not require such a complex internal system. As more fragments were examined, it became clear that this object did far more than point or measure. The biggest obstacle to understanding was damage. The sea had not been kind to the mechanism. Saltwater corrosion had fused many gears together, bronze had expanded and cracked, wooden components had collapsed. The object was broken into dozens of fragments, many no larger than a hand. Some gears were missing entirely, leaving gaps in the system. In the early 1900s, researchers had only their eyes and basic tools. They could sketch what they saw, they could measure exposed teeth, but they could not see inside the solid blocks of corrosion. Much of the mechanism's structure remained hidden, locked inside mineral buildup, like a fossil. There was also another problem. No surviving ancient text described a machine like this in clear detail. Greek writers such as Cicero mention complex devices built by figures like Archimedes. Cicero even described a mechanical sphere that showed the movement of celestial bodies. But these accounts were brief and lacked technical detail. They confirmed that such ideas existed, but not how they were built or how common they were. By the middle of the 20th century, scholars had reached a cautious consensus. The Antikythera mechanism was mechanical. It was designed intentionally, not assembled by accident. It used rotational motion, likely driven by turning a knob or handle, and it was meant to display information in a structured way. Beyond that, certainty faded. This long period of uncertainty is important to understand. The mystery did not grow because people wanted it to be mysterious. It grew because evidence refused to fit into known categories. There was no rush to label it advanced technology or lost knowledge. In fact, many researchers preferred conservative explanations. The problem was that even the conservative explanations did not work. The intellectual context of ancient Greece made the situation more complex, not less. Mathematicians like Hipparchus had already developed accurate models of planetary motion by the 2nd century BCE. Astronomers could predict eclipses. Philosophers debated the structure of the cosmos. None of this was in dispute. The question was whether such knowledge had ever been translated into a compact mechanical device. Until the Antikythera mechanism, there was no physical proof that it had. This created a quiet tension in the historical timeline. If the device truly came from the 1st century BCE, then either it was an isolated invention with no surviving relatives, or there had once been a tradition of mechanical craftsmanship that left almost no trace. Both possibilities were uncomfortable. Historians tend to rely on patterns, not exceptions. Unlike lost underwater cities or sunken structures that hint at vanished settlements, this was a mystery of scale. A small object, not a monumental ruin, challenged assumptions about what ancient people could build. It was an ancient ocean discovery, not because it revealed a new place, but because it revealed a missing layer of capability. The mechanism did not suggest forgotten civilizations or dramatic collapse. It suggested something subtler. That knowledge can exist, be applied, and still disappear without leaving a clear record. The technology does not always advance in straight lines. By the end of this chapter in the story, the Antikythera mechanism remained exactly what it had been for decades, undeniably ancient, undeniably complex, and still without a clear home in the accepted history of technology. It sat in museum drawers and display cases not as a solved artifact, but as a question made of bronze. The deep sea mystery was no longer about where it came from. It was about why it seemed to arrive alone.
For most of the 20th century, the Antikythera mechanism remained locked behind its own corrosion. Researchers knew it mattered, but they could not fully see it. That began to change in the 1970s when X-ray imaging was first applied to the fragments. For the first time, shadows of gears appeared beneath the hardened bronze surfaces. Teeth overlapped. Shafts crossed paths. The object was far more crowded inside than anyone had imagined. Even so, X-rays only hinted at what was hidden. The real breakthrough came decades later, in the early 2000s, when researchers turned to high-resolution CT scanning. These scans, carried out by teams including scientists from University College London and the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, allowed the fragments to be digitally sliced layer by layer. Without touching the metal, researchers could rotate virtual models of the gears, count their teeth, and trace how motion would have flowed through the system. What emerged was not a simple instrument, but a tightly organized machine. The gears were arranged in stacked layers, some mounted on shared axles, others driving secondary systems. Turning one gear would cause several others to move in precise relationships. This was not decoration or experiment, it was engineering. As researchers mapped the system, patterns began to appear. Certain gear ratios matched known astronomical cycles described by ancient Greek astronomers. One of the clearest was the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period used to align lunar months with the solar year. This cycle was well documented in Greek texts, but seeing it encoded physically in bronze was something new. On the back of the mechanism, CT scans revealed spiral dials with inscribed markings. These were not artistic designs, they were scales. One tracked eclipse cycles, including the Saros cycle, which predicts when solar and lunar eclipses repeat. Tiny inscriptions, etched so finely they were almost invisible to the naked eye, labeled these cycles using Greek terminology. This was not guesswork. The device was meant to be read. The front of the mechanism told a related story. It likely displayed the positions of the sun and moon against the zodiac, following Greek astronomical models of the time. Evidence suggested the moon's motion was adjusted to reflect its irregular speed across the sky, a detail associated with theories developed by Hipparchus in the 2nd century BCE. Again, this did not mean Hipparchus built the device. It meant the builder understood the same mathematical ideas. Taken together, the Antikythera mechanism functioned as an analog computer, not in the modern electronic sense, but as a physical system designed to calculate and display information. By turning a single input, a user could see how multiple astronomical cycles unfolded over time. It compressed decades of celestial motion into a manageable, mechanical form. This realization shifted the mystery. The question was no longer what the mechanism did. It was how and why it existed at all. Nothing about the device required futuristic tools. Bronze could be cast and cut in antiquity. Greek craftsmen were skilled in metalwork. Mathematical knowledge was available. Yet no other surviving object shows these elements combined in this way. In the long record of ancient technology, this machine stands almost alone. That absence matters. Comparable gear-driven systems do not appear again until medieval Europe, in the form of large mechanical clocks built in the 13th and 14th centuries. For generations, historians assumed those clocks marked the birth of complex mechanical design. The Antikythera mechanism quietly rewrote that story, and yet it did so without rewriting the rest of the record. There is no clear line of development connecting this device to later clockwork. No workshops filled with similar machines. No written manuals describing their construction. No widespread use suggested by archaeology. This was not a mass-produced tool. Some researchers suggested it was a teaching device, perhaps used to demonstrate astronomy. Others argued it was custom-built for a wealthy patron with an interest in science. The shipwreck itself offered clues but no final answers. The vessel carried luxury goods, statues, and fine objects, likely bound for Rome. The mechanism could have been a prized possession, transported alongside art and treasure. What remains striking is how carefully the device was made for something that left so little trace. The inscriptions were precise. The gear ratios were deliberate. Nothing about it suggests a rough prototype. It feels like the product of an established tradition, even if that tradition has vanished. This is where the mystery deepens rather than resolves. Underwater archaeology often reveals lost cities or sunken structures that hint at submerged civilizations. In this case, the sea preserved not a place, but a level of knowledge. An ancient ocean discovery exposed a gap in what we thought we knew about technological history. The Antikythera mechanism does not suggest a forgotten empire or secret science. It suggests something quieter and harder to accept, that advanced ideas can appear, flourish briefly, and then disappear without leaving a clear trail. That progress is not always cumulative. That knowledge can be fragile. The more clearly researchers decoded the machine, the less comfortable its place in history became. Understanding it did not make it feel normal. It made it feel isolated, a single point of complexity surrounded by centuries of simpler tools. Today, digital reconstructions allow us to turn virtual gears and watch the system come alive. We can see eclipses predicted. Lunar phases align, cycles repeat, the machine works. That fact is no longer in doubt. What remains unresolved is the human story behind it. Who designed it? Who used it? Whether it was one of many or truly one of a kind. In the landscape of deep-sea mystery and unexplained ruins, the Antikythera mechanism stands apart. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is precise. The paradox is simple and enduring. The better we understand how the machine worked, the harder it becomes to explain why history seems to have forgotten it. By the time modern researchers finished scanning, modeling, and decoding the Antikythera mechanism, there was little doubt left about its authenticity. The object is real. The shipwreck that carried it can be dated reliably to around the 1st century BCE. The materials match what was available at the time. The inscriptions use known Greek language and terminology. Nothing about the device suggests a later forgery or intrusion. On those points, scholars largely agree. They also agree on something else. The mechanism was not a toy or a decorative object. It was designed with serious intent, grounded in mathematical and astronomical knowledge that existed in the ancient Greek world. The gear ratios match real celestial cycles. The layout follows established models of the sun, moon, and eclipses. Whoever built it understood both theory and mechanics and understood them well. And yet, this is where certainty ends. The most basic unanswered question is also the most human one. Who actually built it? No name is attached to the device. No signature survives. Ancient authors like Cicero mention complex astronomical instruments, including devices attributed to Archimedes. But these references are brief and vague. They confirm that such ideas existed, but they do not describe anything like the Antikythera mechanism in enough detail to settle the matter. Without a builder, it is difficult to place the device within a social or institutional setting. Was it created by a single brilliant craftsman? Was it the product of a small workshop combining metalworking and astronomical knowledge? Or was it part of a tradition that existed quietly among scholars and elites, leaving little physical trace? That leads to the second major uncertainty. Was this mechanism unique or simply the only survivor? So far, no similar devices have been found. Not on land, not underwater, not in museums mislabeled as something else. This absence is striking, especially given how carefully the Antikythera mechanism was made. If such machines were common, even rare common, we would expect fragments, tools, or descriptions to appear elsewhere. But archaeology is uneven. Bronze was valuable. Old objects were often melted down and reused. Wooden cases rarely survive outside exceptional conditions. A shipwreck sealed underwater can preserve what centuries of rebuilding on land erase. In that sense, the sea may have saved something that history otherwise destroyed. This idea, known as preservation bias, does not solve the mystery, but it reframes it. The mechanism may not have been alone. It may simply be alone now. There is also uncertainty about how the device was used. Some researchers suggest it was educational, a way to teach astronomical cycles visually. Others think it may have helped plan events tied to calendars, festivals, or games, all of which relied on precise timing in the ancient Greek world. A few propose it was a prestige object, owned by an elite patron as a symbol of learning rather than a practical tool. Navigation is sometimes mentioned, but there is little evidence the mechanism was designed for open sea guidance. Its focus is celestial cycles over long periods, not immediate positioning. Ritual use has also been suggested, especially for eclipse prediction, but again, there is no direct proof. What complicates all of these interpretations is the lack of context. The mechanism was found in a shipwreck carrying many valuable items, but no record explains why it was on that ship or where it was headed. Was it being transported to Rome as a curiosity? Was it moving between Greek centers of learning? Or was it simply traveling with its owner when the ship was lost? Underwater archaeology can recover objects, but it cannot recover intentions. Another open question is why this level of mechanical knowledge seems to vanish from the historical record. After the Roman period, complex geared mechanisms do not reappear until much later. Medieval clockmakers rediscovered similar principles, but there is no clear chain connecting their work to ancient Greece. This does not mean knowledge was lost overnight. Political instability, economic decline, and shifting cultural priorities all played roles in reshaping the ancient world. Institutions that supported specialized craftsmanship could disappear. Texts could be lost. Skills could fade if they were not widely practiced. The Antikythera mechanism may represent knowledge held by a very small group, dependent on specific conditions to survive. When those conditions changed, the knowledge did not spread. It simply ended. Seen this way, the mystery is not evidence of hidden civilizations or advanced lost technology. It is evidence of how fragile progress can be. History does not always move forward in a straight line. Ideas can appear, reach remarkable heights, and then slip quietly out of view. This perspective matters, especially in discussions of deep-sea mystery and ancient ocean discoveries. Not every unexplained object points to lost underwater cities or submerged civilizations. Sometimes it points to gaps in the record, places where evidence thins out and certainty fades. The Antikythera mechanism sits in one of those gaps. We know what it did. We know roughly when it was made. We know it required advanced thinking. What we do not know is how widespread that thinking was, or why it left so little behind. That uncertainty is not a failure of research. It is an honest boundary. Science and history can only work with what survives. In this case, one extraordinary object survived, and much else did not. Today, the mechanism remains one of the most studied artifacts ever recovered from a shipwreck. It continues to be modeled, tested, and discussed. Not because it promises shocking revelations, but because it quietly challenges simple stories about the past. It reminds us that ancient knowledge was uneven, that brilliance was not evenly distributed across time or place, that some achievements flicker briefly and then disappear, leaving behind questions rather than answers. The Antikythera mechanism does not demand belief in lost worlds. It demands patience. It asks us to accept that understanding can be partial and that mystery does not always mean the impossible. Sometimes it simply means incomplete. And that is why, more than a century after it was pulled from the sea, this small, corroded machine still matters. Not as a symbol of forgotten empires, but as a reminder that history is shaped as much by what is missing as by what remains.